In the previous video, the protagonist still does not have her memories of the time she spent with the goblin, which is a bit difficult for him because he needs to restrain himself and keep in mind that he is now a complete stranger to Untak. However, after receiving a letter from Canada that she herself had written, the protagonist decided to investigate how something like that could have happened since she didn't even have a visa to enter the country. And already in the new territory, Untak ended up bumping into Kim Shin. Now let's see a bit before she meets the goblin at that door. What everything indicated was that things began to return to how they were before in the protagonist's life. While walking around the city, Untak ended up seeing that same ghost she had seen years ago in the country. However, despite greeting him, the woman still doesn't remember having talked to him before. The protagonist just found it strange that right after saying hello, the man disappeared into the crowd. And looking further ahead, after they ate delicious sandwiches, which was what Untak could afford, the duo went for a walk in that same park where the protagonist had mentioned the first time they visited the country that if you caught a maple leaf in the air, you would fall in love with the person you were walking with. Later, Untak gathered the courage to ask if he was part of her past because the man spoke as if he knew her very well, and it could indeed be true since the woman knew there were some blank spots in her memory. However, Kim Shin kind of didn't answer that question because he threw another one back at her, asking if she liked him. And since the chemistry between the two was very good, they ended up having dinner together. At this moment, we see that vision the goblin had about the protagonist's future, the only one he managed to see about what awaited her, and realizing that he was part of it, Kim Shin felt a bit foolish for having been so jealous, thinking that Untak would be with another partner. In the next scene, we move to Sunny, who was accessing the security camera footage of her establishment just to see who the man was who wanted to deliver that letter to Untak. And knowing that he had contact with her former landlord, Sunny went to Diakhua to ask for Wang Yeo's number. The woman arranged a meeting with the Grim Reaper, but it was very brief. As always, Wang Yeo kept to himself, even more so now that he seems to be the only one who remembers everything that happened. But as soon as the woman left, the man burst into tears. However, Sunny was also outside with tear-filled eyes, and at that moment, when she called him Wu Bin, we realized that for some reason, the woman also remembered the man and what happened between them. In fact, moving to the night when everything changed, we see Sunny talking to a child, and she expresses her indignation at the times the Almighty interfered in her life. For example, when she discovered she had a brother and her memories returned. Sunny comments that she wished he would be less invasive, and maybe that's why the woman retained her memories of everything that had recently happened. However, since Untak hadn't appeared at the establishment anymore, she realized something had changed. But 5 years later, life ensured that her path and the protagonists would cross again because Untak appeared at the building where Sunny lived to rent an apartment that had become vacant. Since the woman realized that she didn't remember her, the two started their relationship from scratch. Like before, Sunny took care of her as if she were her younger sister. That said, we conclude that both Sunny's and the Grim Reaper's lives were quite difficult over the past 10 years because living with the memories of loved ones and not being able to talk to them was a daily challenge. Now returning to the protagonist, while walking alone through the city, Untak remembered everything as soon as she caught a maple leaf in her hands. That said, she wasted no time in going after the goblin and summoned him at the first opportunity. Thus, as soon as they meet, a kiss happens between our couple, and now they become inseparable. As soon as they return home, the goblin takes Untak to see the Grim Reaper, who is very happy to see that things have turned out well for his friend. However, something intrigues him because the protagonist is 29 years old, and from what he knows about her destiny, this is the age when she will meet a Grim Reaper. Has this become a reality now that they have reunited, or will there be a surprise ahead? Well, we'll have to discover the answer to that question. In the next scene, we see the goblin leaving the protagonist's house. As he descends the stairs, he stops for a moment in front of Sunny's door, and at that moment, the woman arrives, so they end up talking. Kim Shin doesn't know that his sister remembers him, so they treat each other formally. In the brief conversation they had, the Goblin could see Sunny's future, where she was very happy alongside the Grim Reaper, which in a way comforts him, knowing that the two will finally be at peace. Later, as the protagonist is leaving for work, she encounters her aunt waiting outside. And even though her relative continues to be arrogant, Untak invites her to come in and stay at her house. Now, moving to after the protagonist's work, we see that she goes to visit Sunny at her establishment since it had been a long time since the two had talked. And Sunny takes the opportunity to tell her that she is moving her restaurant and her home as well. At this moment, the protagonist comments that the woman talks as if they will never see each other again, but since Untak thinks it was just a misunderstanding, she ends up putting that impression aside and then says goodbye to Sunny to meet the Goblin. In the next scene, we see our lovely couple, and Kim Shin surprises the protagonist by proposing to her. Now later, while Untak is looking at the stars, those ghosts who were her friends appear, and since the protagonist can see them again, the three celebrate. The next day, the Goblin takes his beloved to introduce her to Diakwa for the first time again, and we see that the couple is living their golden days, becoming more and more attached to each other and happy. However, a surprise arrives in their lives when Untak goes to select a story for her new program and realizes that it is about Sunny saying goodbye to everyone, but mainly to the Grim Reaper. With the story going on air, Wang Yeo, who was also listening to the radio, knew exactly where to find her. On the bridge where they crossed paths for the first time in this life, Sunny said goodbye to her love, saying that she was moving far away because in the same country, she wouldn't be able to keep the promise of not choosing him in this life. And the protagonist also received a goodbye because Sunny wrote a letter to Untak, summarizing that she hoped to have given her some comfort, even though it didn't replace the family she lacked, and wished the protagonist much happiness with her brother. From this moment on, the Grim Reaper's life became quite lonely. Despite having the Goblin, Untak, and Diakwa to keep him company, Wang Yeo blamed himself every day for what he did to Sunny in the life where she was his queen and for what he did to the rest of her family. However, even in mourning, the Grim Reaper went to that woman who also performs this function, the one we discovered was conspiring with Jonghyun using poisons and just wanting to be at peace. Wang Yeo asked the woman for forgiveness for having used her to take his own life. Moving now to the protagonist, her aunt continues to bother her. Even though Untak gives her a house and food, nothing is enough. Seeing that the protagonist is getting exhausted, a ghost friend of hers appears at the residence to take her aunt, who is also stuck in this world due to unresolved matters. Thus, Untak can finally move on and now just enjoy her marriage to the Goblin. The ceremony, by the way, was in that wheat field where he picked the first bouquet he gave to her. A few days pass, and on a perfect day, the beautiful life the Goblin was leading undergoes a significant change. Let's first focus on the Grim Reaper, who was waiting with his colleague for an accident involving a school bus full of children, who unfortunately were going to lose their lives. However, suddenly, after the protagonist drives by waving at Wang Yeo, the duo receives a call telling them to discard those cards because the accident would no longer happen in that way. And right away, the Grim Reaper understood the reason for this. Even though Untak's name wasn't on one of the cards they received, the protagonist was going to lose her life due to a genuine sacrifice. As soon as she realized that an out-of-control truck was going to hit the children head-on, Untak didn't even consider not saving them. The woman was on the phone with the Goblin at the moment she put her vehicle in the truck's path. With tears in his eyes, the Grim Reaper called the lost soul of the 29-year-old to the tea house, and at that moment, I was in tears. Seeing the reunion of the Goblin with his beloved was truly emotional. Unfortunately, they could no longer be together in this life, but Untak asked him to wait for her because she chose not to drink the tea of forgetfulness. Thus, when she reincarnated, she would look for him again. For a long time, the Goblin didn't want to live anymore. After so many losses, this was one of the most impactful for him. At this moment, the Grim Reaper and Diakhwa were very important in helping him rise again. 30 years later, we see that Wang Yeo's time as the Grim Reaper came to an end. He had one last card, and then he could ascend to finally be at peace until his reincarnation. However, the last person the man guided was very important to him, and it was Sunny. The two ascended together and now could change their love story. Unfortunately, the goblin found himself alone for a long time, but one day, while walking around the city, Kim Shin was delighted to see a man with Wang Yeo's face and Sunny acting in a scene. The two had finally reincarnated and could live happily with their companions. And for the goblin, this happiness came a little later in Canada. He was beside their graves when someone with the protagonist's face appeared. At that moment, Kim Shin knew that she was also back in this world and, even better, with her memories of the previous life. What did you think of this season? I hope you liked the summary. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe. If you liked the video, like and share to help me out. See you next time.